Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Friess, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. This morning we'll continue where we left off Friday in this little booklet entitled The Origin of Futurism and Preterism. We've learned that both Futurism and Preterism are Roman Catholic teaching. They are Roman Catholic schools of interpretation of Bible prophecy, particularly the prophecies of Daniel, Paul, and John, Revelator. And their interpretations, conflicting as though they may be, have one objective. That is to exonerate the papacy. The papacy is, was, and always will be the Antichrist of the Bible. That is the belief of all Christians prior to the Protestant Reformation, during the Protestant Reformation, and after the Protestant Reformation. That is the truth. God prophesied, history revealed. Papacy is, was, and always will be the Antichrist, the Roman Catholic Church, the synagogue of Satan, and we have nothing to do with either of them. Christ is our King, the only and the true King of Kings and Lord of Lords is Jesus Christ. And the papacy, throughout its career, from the beginning through the current pope and off into the future, the papacy will assert that it, and it alone, is the voice of Christ on the earth, and that he should be both King of Kings, that is, all the kings of the earth must do as he says, and Lord of Lords, that is, he is to be the Lord of our life. He is to be believed and trusted for salvation. And the Roman Catholic Church is the means by which that salvation is obtained. The sacraments of the Roman Catholic Church are what save you. Unless you are a member of the Roman Catholic Church and participate in her sacraments, there is no salvation for you. That is the definition of Antichrist, someone who replaces Christ. Someone who asserts that he is Christ on earth. Roman Catholic canon law establishes this, and the kings of the earth respond in kind by obeying him and imposing upon the people of their land Roman Catholic canon law. The Roman Catholic Church is the state-sponsored church in this country. I know that's going to fly in the face of what we're commonly taught, but anyone who witnesses what happens in Washington, D.C. can clearly see that the government caters to the Roman Catholic Church and treats all of us, Protestants, as though we are somewhat wayward and unaware of what's going on in the world. Now, we're going to pick up where we left off last week, just going to refresh our memories a little bit. So far in the book, we have laid aside Futurism and Preterism as papal teachings, and they are developed and created by the Roman Catholic Church to destroy the historicist belief, okay, the Protestant belief that the papacy is, was, and always will be the Antichrist. Now, historicism was the faith of our fathers. Okay, the author of this book, with the help of Henry Grattan Guinness, are going to prove that historicism has been the belief of all Bible-believing Christians. It has never died. The protest is not over. He says, in the following pages, numerous quotations from distinguished authors and church scholars will be found. Because of their schooling and their unique positions in history, they have earned the right to speak with authority on this subject. Historicism is a viewpoint that dates back to the earliest centuries of the Christian church, but seems to be almost forgotten today among the opposing schools of prophetic interpretation. There is a plethora of material espousing Futurism, an abundance of books promoting Preterism, but scant mention of historicism today. In 1887, Dr. Henry Grattan Guinness, a doctor of divinity and a fellow of the Royal Astronomical Society, an English scholar, a preacher, a writer, and a lecturer, wrote a book entitled Romanism and the Reformation from the Standpoint of Prophecy. I also read that book here on Inquisition Update a few years back, and it is the centerpiece of all the Protestant works that we've read here on Inquisition Update. And I encourage my listeners to get a copy of it. It's been republished, and it's a very vital read. Continuing now, the author says, in this book, Romanism and the Reformation from the Standpoint of Prophecy by Henry Grattan Guinness, which was reprinted in 1967, that's just 2 years after the Vatican Council II, he devoted 3 chapters to the overview of those who interpret prophecy. Pre-Reformation interpreters, in other words, all true Bible believers from the time of the Protestant Reformation in 1517 all the way back to the first century church. Okay? He's going to give us a general overview of those who interpreted prophecy, the pre-Reformation interpreters, the interpreters of the Protestant Reformation, and then the post-Reformation interpreters. Okay? Those are the 3. And encompassed in all those 3 periods is the entire history of the church, from the first century to the current, and it will extend all the way out until the time Christ returns. What is the proper interpretation of the prophecies? He quotes from scores of writers, preachers, and historians who were of the historicist school of thought. Excerpts from his work bear repeating within these pages. Following are quotations from Lecture 5, pages 112 through 114 of the aforementioned book. Now here's what Henry Grattan Guinness said in his book. And excuse me, I'll remind my listeners that Henry Grattan Guinness's book was simply compiled after a series of speeches that he gave, lectures, public lectures that he gave. They simply restored what he talked about in these lectures and reduced them to print for us to read. That's what Henry Grattan Guinness's book is, Romanism and the Reformation from the Standpoint of Prophecy. Now here's the quote from this work, page 112 to 114. Quote, with many varieties as to detail, we find there have existed and still exist 2 great opposite schools of interpretation of Bible prophecy, the papal and the Protestant, or the futurist and the historical. Now, at this point, I don't want my listeners to be confused. Henry Grattan Guinness is talking about 2 opposing schools of Bible prophecy interpretation, the papal and the Protestant. Protestant interpretation of the prophecies is historicism. The papal form or school of Bible prophecy interpretation are 2 opposing schools. They oppose one another. The papacy has 2 ways to interpret these prophecies. The first one is called Preterism, which asserts that the Antichrist was Nero, and the second papal interpretation of the prophecies is Futurism, that which says that the Antichrist is future. Okay? So don't be confused by what he says. There are 2 great opposing schools of interpretation, the papal and the Protestant. But it just so happens that the papacy has 2 within itself. Remember the analogy we gave of the cookie jar? Okay? Little Johnny said, well, I couldn't have taken the cookies because I was in the bathtub when the cookies disappeared. And then when it was found out that the shower was dry, there were no wet towels in the hamper, then little Johnny changed his story. No, I was down to Jimmy's house during the time when the cookies were taken. Okay? The Protestant view sees that both of these are lies, obvious lies, because Johnny's standing there with cookie crumbs all over his face, chocolate chips smeared all over his face, And the Protestants say Johnny ate the cookies. Okay? We're not going to argue back and forth between two of the lies, whether Johnny was in the shower or whether Johnny was down to Jimmy's house. We know Johnny took the cookies. Okay? The papacy is, was, and always will be the Antichrist. It doesn't matter whether the papacy preaches Futurism or whether he preaches Preterism. The papacy is the Antichrist. He's got the cookie all over his face. Okay? So it's childish for us to continue a discussion about two papal lies that contradict one another and try to exonerate the papacy when we find out that the papacy inspired and created and promoted both of those lies. We know who the Antichrist is. That's the Protestant view. Okay? All right? The papacy has two opposing, contradicting excuses for the papacy. That is Preterism and Futurism. Now, what lies behind Preterism that says that Antichrist was destroyed during the old pagan Roman Empire? Or Futurism, which says the Antichrist is not until the distant future or just before Christ returns? We have the whole history of the Roman Catholic Church lies in between. Both Futurism and Preterism perfectly exclude the papacy for consideration. It can't be the papacy. It's either the old Roman Empire or the fall of the Jewish state before 70 A.D., or it's the Antichrist in the future that hasn't even shown his face in the world yet. The Protestants say it was the papacy, it is the papacy, it always will be the papacy, and this argument is stupid. Okay? It's as simple as that. There are two opposite schools of interpretation of Bible prophecy. There is the Protestant and the papal. Okay? Now, if you're going to hold to one of the papal interpretations, it's either Preterism or Futurism. Take your pick. In either case, the papacy is excluded from consideration. The Protestant view, I know I'm repeating myself, this is important though. The Protestant view is, it's neither Futurism nor Preterism, it is historicism. The whole history of the Christian church has been marked by this papal authority, this antichrist authority, this authority that says that he is the voice of God on the earth, that every king and every government and every people must conform to Roman Catholic canon law, must be a subject of the Holy Roman Pontiff, can only be saved in the Roman Catholic Church through her sacraments and the decrees and papal bulls and Roman Catholic canon law. These are the instruments that God left behind for mankind to be saved. Which is just ludicrous on its face, because I believe Adam and Eve were saved. I believe Moses was saved. I believe Noah was saved. I believe Abraham was saved. I believe there were many saved in Jerusalem when Jesus walked the face of the earth, and the Roman Catholic Church hadn't even been thought of by then. And it is believed by a huge percentage of the United States and the world. Let's just draw a figure, something like 25% of the earth's population are Roman Catholic in their belief. When the Roman Catholic canon law, which states there is no salvation outside the Roman Catholic Church, falls flat on its face. The Roman Catholic Church didn't exist in the Garden of Eden. It didn't exist in antiquity. It's a recent thing in the earth compared to world history. And that anybody believes there's no salvation outside the Roman Catholic Church is just a testament to the weakness, the scriptural, historical weakness of sinful, wicked, fallen men. Okay, and Protestantism recognizes this, that it's the blood of Jesus, the Lamb which was slain at the foundation of the world, Remember, Jesus made sacrifice. He covered Adam and Eve with coats of skins because the aprons that Adam and Eve made for themselves were insufficient to cover their nakedness, insufficient to cover their sin. So Christ offered a sacrifice, a lamb, you can be sure, and it was used for coats of skins to cover Adam and Eve. And there are examples after example throughout the whole Bible proving this assertion. That is the Protestant assertion. For the Roman Catholic Church to assert that there's no salvation outside the Roman Catholic Church is just a diabolical lie, and even a child wouldn't believe it. Okay? But since there is historicism in the world that sees the papacy as the Antichrist of the Bible, then the papacy has to create alternative schools of Bible prophecy to shed the onus of Antichrist away from the papacy. Preterism does that, Futurism does that, but there still lies historicism between the two, and it's the only one that makes sense. Okay? Again, quoting from Henry Grattan Guinness in his book, Romanism and the Reformation from the Standpoint of Prophecy, he says, with many varieties as to detail, we find there have existed and still exist two great opposite schools of interpretation. The papal, of which is Preterism and Futurism, and Protestantism, which is historicism. All right? The papal schools of Futurism and Preterism stand opposed to the Protestant view, historicism, which says it is the papacy. Now he says the latter regards the prophecies of Daniel, Paul, and John, that is the Protestant school, or the historicist school of Bible prophecy interpretation, regards the prophecies of Daniel, Paul, and John as fully and faithfully setting forth the entire course of Christian history. The former school of interpretation, that is the Roman Catholic school, the papal school, of which is Preterism and Futurism, as dealing chiefly with the future fragment of time at its close. Okay? Speaking specifically of Futurism. I'll repeat myself one more time. If you're going to embrace the papal interpretation of Bible prophecy and exonerate the papacy of the onus of Antichrist, you have two choices: Preterism or Futurism. If you're going to hold the biblical, the Protestant school of Bible prophecy interpretation, you must embrace historicism. Okay? Futurism and Preterism were never heard in the Protestant world until just 200 to 250 years ago. So what was believed by all Christians prior to 200 and 250 years ago? Historicism. It was the only view of Bible prophecy interpretation. It was the Protestant view. Protestants believed the Protestant view. Historicism, that Bible prophecy reveals the papacy. That Bible prophecy specifically points to the papacy and no one else as the Antichrist of the Bible. The Protestant view was literally born with Paul's letter to the Thessalonians, when he said, "He who now letteth will let until he be taken out of the way, and then that man of sin shall be revealed, the son of perdition." And Paul had to be careful because he was talking about the power that now reigned in Rome. That was the Caesars. Paul was predicting the fall of the Roman Empire. And when the empire of Rome fell, what would stand up in its place, though it would still be Roman, would be the man of sin. That can only be the papacy. And as we've said before, Henry Grattan Guinness produces in his book a prayer that was prayed communally in the first century church, praying for the longevity of the Caesars, because they knew that power that would stand up in the power vacuum left behind at the fall of the Roman Empire would be that man of sin. And history reveals who that man of sin is. It can be none other than the papacy. And just as surely as we can know who Jesus Christ is, the Messiah, the Christ, we can just assuredly know who the Antichrist is, the papacy. Right? He says again, with many varieties as to detail, we find there have existed and still exist two great opposite schools of Bible prophecy interpretation, the papal and the Protestant, or the futurist and the historical. The latter regards the prophecies of Daniel, Paul, and John as fully and faithfully setting forth the entire course of Christian history. The former, that is the papal, is dealing chiefly with a future fragment of time at its close. All right. Now we continue. It is held by many, now still quoting from Henry Grattan Guinness's book, Romanism and the Reformation from the Standpoint of Prophecy. He says it is held by many that the historicist school of Bible prophecy interpretation is represented only by a small modern sect of the church. We shall show that it has existed from the very beginning and includes the larger part of the greatest and the best teachers of the church for 1,800 years. Okay? We put it in plain English. Historicism was the only belief in the Protestant churches from the first century, extending for 1,800 years at the time of the writing of this book. Okay? That is the orthodox teaching in the Protestant schools, in the Protestant churches, in the Protestant colleges, in the Protestant universities. That's the only school of interpretation that was ever taught in the Protestant church, which goes back to the first century. Remember, they protested the papacy. They didn't know it by name, but they knew 1,800 years ago, because of Paul's revelation to the Thessalonians, that the Roman Empire was going to fall, and that what stood up in its place was going to be the man of sin, the son of perdition. So history has revealed the fulfillment of what Daniel, Paul, and John, all three likewise prophesied. The Antichrist. We see him throughout history, from the fall of the Roman Empire to the current time. Now, many would say, well, Tom, the papacy doesn't control the kings of the earth. The papacy isn't this or that. The papacy is poor. The papacy doesn't have any respect in the world. All the Roman Catholic pedophile priests and all. Look who's got the most power in Washington, D.C. The Roman Catholic lobby is the most powerful lobby in every nation. Okay? The presidents of the United States, they make all kinds of false promises to its people, but they turn around and serve the papacy. The presidents of the United States, each in their turn, whenever the opportunity demands or whenever the Pope instructs them, makes a trip to Rome, to the Vatican, to confer in private with the papacy. And not just the presidents of the earth, all the kings of the earth do. As unlikely as it may seem, it's only unlikely because you believed lies all of your Christian life, either Preterism or Futurism. Historicism explains current events. We'll be back right after this.
Hear it first on FirstAmendmentRadio.com and FirstAmendmentRadio.net. If you'd like to get a copy of this program, you may subscribe at FirstAmendmentRadio.com for only $45 a month, and you'll receive an MP3 CD weekly of all of our programs. As a bonus, we'll send you a password for our audio archives online. That's a $15 value. Or you may request any month of any program on one MP3 CD for a minimum donation of only $25, or any single program on tape, MP3 CD, or CD for only $15. You may do all of this online at FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Just follow the instructions to make a donation or subscribe. You may also adopt an hour of your favorite program. Please don't forget that most of the programs on FirstAmendmentRadio.com are listener-supported. Don't do internet? Then call 559-781-3773 and we'll be honored to help you. Thank you from all of us here at FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.
Welcome back from the break. You're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio. And if you'd like to support this program and keep it on the air, please support First Amendment Radio. If you'd like to email me, please do so. My email address is tom@seawaves.us, and my website is inquisitionupdate.org. And by the way, I want to remind my listeners that I'm just a one-man band. I don't have any help, and it's a very small, very private operation here, and I don't have time to answer every email, especially if they don't require an answer. But if you have questions that require an answer, I will take the time. Okay? But please don't be offended if you email me to express your appreciation for Inquisition Update and your comments don't require a response. Please don't be offended if I don't have the time to respond. Those important emails that I get from my listeners, either questioning the facts of the program or questions about something that was said or done here at Inquisition Update that matter, I do take the time to answer those emails. All right. Now, speaking of the historicist, the Protestant, the biblical, the historical, the prophetic view, as held by all Bible-believing Christians for 1,800 years. Henry Grattan continues, says, we shall show that the fathers of the church belong to it, that is, the historicist school of Bible prophecy. And by the way, who are the church fathers? Okay, we're not to call anyone fathers, but we know what this author is talking about. The originators of the church were the apostles, were they not? And wasn't it not Paul, the apostle, who told the Thessalonians in 2 Thessalonians 2 verse 7 that he who now restrains the rise of Antichrist will continue to restrain the rise of Antichrist until he is taken out of the way, and when he is taken out of the way, then that man of sin shall be revealed. Okay? Paul was speaking in the present tense 2,000 years ago. He who now letteth will let until he be taken out of the way, and then that man of sin shall be revealed. So who did Paul know was going to be the Antichrist? He may not have known him by name unless God revealed it to him. We have no record that he included the word papacy in his letter to the 2 Thessalonians in chapter 2 verse 7, but he knew that as soon as the pagan Roman Empire fell, the Antichrist power would raise up in its place. The first century Christians knew it, and you have to believe that all of the apostles who shared the same Spirit, the Spirit of Christ, likewise knew that the Roman power was going to fall and another Roman power would stand up in its place. And it would appear to be Christ-like. It would appear to be Christian. But his works would find him out, and that he would persecute the saints of the Most High. He would seek to change, he would think, rather, to change times and laws and deceive the whole world and shed the blood of the saints and the martyrs of Jesus. That could be none other than the papacy. Paul was right. You've got to know that all the apostles held this view, since they had the same Spirit, the Spirit of prophecy, and they taught this clandestinely, because if their teaching had ever fallen into the hands of the Roman Caesars, Christian church might have been destroyed. But God preserved it. The apostles were tactful in their teaching. The churches, the first century churches, were diligent to pray for the extension, or rather the longevity of the Caesars, not because the Caesars of the Roman Empire were good Christian men. They were pagans. But they knew that that power that would replace the Caesars would be the man of sin and would persecute God's people more than anyone had ever persecuted God's people in the history of the world, including Pharaoh. Okay? He says, we shall show that the fathers of the church belong to the historicist school of Bible prophecy interpretation, that the most learned medieval commentators on the Scriptures belong to the historicist school of Bible interpretation, that the confessors, reformers, and martyrs belonged to the historicist school of Bible prophecy interpretation, that it has included a vast multitude of erudite expositors of latter times. Okay? And I may not be erudite, and I may not be counted in this, but I am indeed upholding the historicist school of Bible prophecy. Okay? There have always been those who upheld the historicist view of Bible prophecy. And why are you hearing about historicism for the first time in your life, most likely? Because we've been persecuted and drowned out and minimalized and marginalized and persecuted and lied about and simply excused as some kind of a heretic. But we maintain the faith of the fathers. We believe in Jesus Christ and Him alone. He is the true and only King of kings and Lord of lords. The governments of the world must obey Him and Him alone. And we are opposed to the Antichrist, the papacy, to whom all the kings of the earth pay homage. Okay? So that makes us, just like the first century church that knew this truth, that makes us the enemy of the state. That's why Paul spoke clandestinely. Paul was preaching the end of the Roman Empire. Okay? And that with the closing of the Roman Empire, there was standing up an empire that will never end. Christ's kingdom. It began in the first century. It still exists today. It will exist forever and forever. The kingdom of Christ. And we are opposed to the Antichrist, the papacy that controls all the governments of the world. Okay? This is the belief of all historicists throughout history, from the first century through medieval times, the Protestant Reformation, and even today. It never changes. We are for Christ. We are against Antichrist. It does Christ no service to pay lip service to Jesus, but not oppose his counterfeit in the world. Okay? We have two planks in the Protestant church. In the historicist church, there are two planks. We have Christ on the one hand, whom we worship and obey, and Antichrist on the other that controls the governments of the world to whom we are opposed. Okay? It's not a peaceful existence between the body and the kingdom of Christ and the kingdom of Antichrist. The kingdom of Christ is heavenly, it's eternal, it's divine, it's headed up by Jesus Christ and Him alone. The governments of this world are controlled by the God of this world, Satan himself, who is hidden behind a cloak of Christian piety, the papacy. He is the Antichrist. Just like Martin Luther said, papacy is simply the mask behind which Satan resides. And it's believed to be Christianity today. Whenever you discuss the Roman Catholic Church or the papacy or any of that, from henceforward, never again refer to it as a Christian church. It is the church of Antichrist. Okay? It is the counterfeit Christianity. And is guilty of the blood of the saints and the martyrs of Jesus. All right? The confessors and the reformers and the martyrs belong to the historicist school of Bible prophecy interpretation. It has included a vast multitude of erudite expositors of latter times also. We shall show that all these have held to the central truth that prophecy faithfully mirrors the church's history as a whole, and not merely commencing or closing at a fragment of history. What he's saying here, that the proper interpretation of Bible prophecy considers the whole period of the church, from the first century church till Christ's return. Prophecies of Daniel, the prophecies of Paul, the prophecies of John set forth the entire history of the Christian church. Preterism says that prophecy ended with the fall of the pagan Roman Empire, that the Antichrist was the pagan Roman Empire and it was destroyed. And now, if you're a preterist, you must believe that all the period of the church is establishing the kingdom of Christ, and the world gives credit to this to the papacy. So it is the foundation upon which the papacy asserts that it and it alone is the kingdom of Christ. Then on the other hand, we have Futurism that says that the Antichrist was not the old pagan Roman Empire, that it's a single individual at the end of time, and only when the Antichrist is gone out of the way will the kingdom of Christ replace it. The kingdom of Christ started when Christ died and said it is finished. It has been building ever since. So what does the focus of Preterism do? Gives the building of the church to the Roman Catholic Church. What does Futurism do? Denies that the kingdom of Christ exists. See how craftily Satan has destroyed the truth? And these teachings are the orthodox teaching in all the churches. Like I've said many times, the worst place for a Bible-believing Christian today is in the churches. The worst place. It'd be better to stay home and read the scriptures for yourself and your family and your friends, and be careful who you talk to outside of the church and what you say, because they believe the opposite. Okay? All right. He said, referring to the pre-Reformation interpreters, Dr. Henry Grattan Guinness states the following on pages 123 and 124 of the aforementioned book, Romanism and the Reformation. Here's more of what he said. It should be noted that none of the fathers held the futurist gap theory, the theory that the book of Revelation overleaps entirely nearly 18 centuries of Christian history and plunges at once into the distant future, and devoting itself entirely to predicting the events of the last few years of this dispensation. Okay? Now, anybody can see from what Henry Grattan Guinness has just said, just how ridiculous it is to believe in Futurism. To believe in futurism suggests that no Bible prophecy has been fulfilled throughout the full history of the church. 1,800 years. The prophecy was wrapped up by 70 AD, or at the very latest 410 AD, when the Roman Empire fell. And likewise, the futurists, that Bible prophecy won't be fulfilled until the Antichrist comes. This so-called Antichrist, when he's been here all along. Okay? That's the preterist and the futurist. They're both absurd on their face. Both ignore the entire history of the church. Again, he says, it should be noted that none of the church fathers held the futurist gap theory. The 2,000-year gap when God just went to sleep. That there's somehow a gap of 2,000 plus years between Daniel's 69th week and Daniel's 70th week of prophecy, is recorded in Daniel chapter 9. It's absurd. But that's what's believed in the churches today. It should be noted that none of the church fathers held the futurist gap theory, the theory that the book of Revelation overleaps, simply jumps over nearly 1,800 years of Christian history, plunging at once into the distant future and devoting itself entirely to predicting the events of the last few years. Now, you can argue whether it's 7 years or 3.5 years or whatever, but the last few years of this dispensation, the dispensation of the church, as it's often called. I'd like to destroy the word dispensation altogether. God has been telling a story from the beginning of the Bible to the very end. He's used different men, different times, different means, but the message has all been the same. Somebody asked me what the dispensations are of the Bible. I'll just plainly tell you they are one. There is one dispensation in the Bible. It is the dispensation of God's grace to man. It began in the Garden of Eden. It will end at Christ's return. One dispensation. Christ dispensed his blood and shed it upon all who would receive him. That's the dispensation of the Bible. Dispensationalism, as it's taught in the churches, is that there are two forms of salvation. One, by the sacrifice of Jesus Christ for Christians, and another means of salvation for the Jew, or even for the Roman Catholic, that they can make sacrifices and achieve salvation. That is a lie. It's only Christ's blood that washes away our sins. The blood of lambs and goats never washed away any sin. It was faith in Christ, the first lamb that was slain from the very foundation of the world. All the sacrifices on the Temple Mount during the Jewish period was simply pointing back to that sacrifice Christ made for Adam and Eve. And the Roman Catholic sacrifice called the Mass is just a mockery. An absolute mockery. Okay? Who is it who makes a sacrifice for the remission of sins? Whether they be Jew or Roman Catholic, they can be but one thing. They reject Christ's sacrifice, and they make their own. Now, isn't that the difference between Cain and Abel? Righteous Abel made a sacrifice of a lamb, a spotless lamb from his own herd. Cain brought his own sacrifice. Isn't that precisely what the Roman Catholic Church does? They make their own sacrifice because they've forsaken the true one. And it's sad, but because the churches now teach futurism, they find themselves beginning to contemplate making the same sacrifice on their altars that the Roman Catholic Church does. That's the damage that futurism has done. Again, it says, it should be noted that none of the fathers of the church held the futurist or the gap theory, The theory that the book of Revelation overleaps nearly 1,800 years of Christian history, plunging at once into the distant future and devoting itself entirely to predicting the events of the last few years of this dispensation. As to the subject of Antichrist, there was a universal agreement among them concerning the general idea of the prophecy, while there were differences as to details, these differences arising chiefly from the notion that the Antichrist would be in some way Jewish or even Roman. It is true they thought that the Antichrist would be an individual man. According to Henry Grattan Guinness, the early church believed that the Antichrist was a single individual. And he says their early position sufficiently accounted for this. In other words, there's proof from their writings that this is what they believed. They had no conception and could have no conception of the true nature and the length of the tremendous apostasy which was to set in upon the Christian church. They were not prophets and could not foresee that the church was to remain 19 centuries in the wilderness and to pass through prolonged and bitter persecution under the succession of nominally Christian but apostate rulers, filling the place of the ancient Caesars and emulating their anti-Christian deeds. So it's evident from the early church writings, when they did not have yet, they knew it was going to be a power that would replace the Caesars, but they had no idea that it would last 1,800 years or 2,000 years. And they believed that it might be just one person. Okay? But history has revealed the truth. That Antichrist was not just one person, that he didn't come and die 2,000 years ago or 1,800 years ago, but that Antichrist power has literally ruled and reigned throughout the entire Christian era. Now, the early Christians couldn't have foreseen this, that God would allow Satan's vicar, the papacy, the Antichrist, the man of sin, the son of perdition, to persecute the saints, not for the span of one lifetime, but for the span of the entire papal throne. Okay? Now look how Henry Grattan Guinness describes the papacy. He calls it the prolonged and bitter persecution under the, quote, succession of nominally Christian but apostate rulers, filling the place of the ancient Caesars and emulating their anti-Christian deeds. So you can tell Martin Luther is revealing, or rather, Henry Grattan Guinness is revealing, that the Antichrist is a succession of nominally Christian but apostate rulers, that is, they're liars, filling the place of the ancient Caesars. So you know Henry Grattan Guinness knows about whom Paul was speaking when he said, "He who now letteth will let till he be taken out of the way, and then that man of sin shall be revealed." He says, filling the place of the ancient Caesars and emulating their anti-Christian deeds. That's how he describes the papacy, a succession of nominally Christian but apostate rulers, filling the place of the ancient Caesars and emulating their antichrist deeds. You can tell Henry Grattan Guinness was a true historicist. He was a true Bible-believing Christian. He not only knew who the Christ was, but he knew unequivocally who the Antichrist was. It is the papacy, a succession of what appeared to be Christian, but apostate rulers, filling the place of the ancient Caesars and emulating their anti-Christian deeds. That's just a long way of saying it's the papacy. It was the papacy, it is the papacy, it always will be the papacy. But eloquent writers and speakers aren't as simple as I am. I just spell it right out. Simple English that even a blithering idiot can understand. Because, look, we are sinful, wicked, fallen men. I don't try to impress people with my literacy, my eloquence. It's better be frank and open and truthful, blatantly obvious what I say so that no one can misunderstand me. But those of Henry Grattan Guinness's time understood, as Protestantism was under attack during the writing of this book. Protestantism was under attack by Futurism and Preterism, and Henry Grattan Guinness brought attention to that attack. He identified that which was attacking Protestantism. It was the Roman Catholic Church through false interpretations of Bible prophecy, and he was declaring the papacy, the author of those attacks, that the papacy still is, was, and always will be the Antichrist, that historicism is the only true interpretation of Bible prophecy, and that all of Christianity must take a heed and restore historicism and stop lies, these papal lies that do nothing but exonerate the papacy. Now, the author is going to talk about the origin of Futurism. And I want to preface the reading of this portion of the book with the logical conclusion that since throughout the history of the Roman Catholic Church, there were those in the church, in the Roman Catholic Church, who had access to the Scriptures, and even by their Latin Bibles, they determined that the papacy is the Antichrist. And they began to say so even within the Roman Catholic Church. What we're talking about is Roman Catholics declaring the papacy to be the man of sin, the little horn of Daniel, the Antichrist. And Rome has always had to deal with dissent within the Roman Catholic Church. So you must take that under advisement before we read the rest of this, the next segment of this book dealing with Futurism. We're going to deal with apparent rise of Futurism, but that rise of Futurism is talking specifically about its rise in the Protestant churches, not the Roman Catholic Church. Futurism is an ancient teaching in the Roman Catholic Church. It's only new in the Protestant churches. So how did it originate in the Protestant churches? That's what we're going to talk about tomorrow. Don't miss it. You've been listening to Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio.
Visit crosstheborder.org, C-R-O-S-S, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org. When it comes to prophecy today, much of the evangelical Christian world has their eyes on Israel, waiting and watching to see when the Third Temple will begin to be built. The plans are drawn, the Jewish people are eager. Most evangelical Christians today believe that the rapture will happen before the Third Temple is built. Hi, I'm Michael Eugene. I was taught that Daniel's 70th week was in the future. Is that really what the Bible teaches? Have we searched the Scriptures and found this to be true? Why is it so important for a re-established Israel to build a Third Temple in Jerusalem? Is it necessary to build a temple on the same location already occupied by the Dome of the Rock? Is it necessary for sacrifices to take place in the temple on Temple Mount? Is there really a rapture followed by 7 years of tribulation? What is the New Testament temple? Can we identify history and prophecy? Who is the first beast in Revelation chapter 13? Who are the 7 kings in Revelation 17? I have asked all these questions, and I have found Nicholas Arthur's new book, When the Third Temple is Built, answers all these questions and more using Scripture to interpret Scripture. The Bible says that no prophecy of Scripture is of any private interpretation. Nicholas shows us in his new book, When the Third Temple is Built, how the Bible interprets prophecy and not man's private interpretation. Visit crosstheborder.org, C-R-O-S-S, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org.